Welcome to the Stoic Storyteller, your sanctuary for raw, unfiltered stories about the darker side of human nature. Here, we dive deep into the reality of life, the toxic relationships, the bitter betrayals, and the quiet, calculating art of absolute justice.
Some people think they can use you, break you, and walk away clean. Today's protagonist was pushed to the absolute edge by the people he trusted most. But instead of breaking, he rebuilt himself in the shadows. This is a story about a trap set so perfectly, the betrayers didn't and oppose. Even know they were caught until the cage locked. Here we go. Evelyn and I met in the crisp autumn of our sophomore year at Cornell University. She was a fiery business major with an insatiable drive, and I was a finance and tech geek who loved turning wild ideas into reality. We were inseparable. By the time we graduated, we didn't and oppose. Just have degrees. We had a blueprint for our future. Together, we founded Aegis Tech, a software solutions firm. We poured everything into it, our 20s, our savings, and our sanity. We worked out of a cramped garage, eating instant ramen, fueled by nothing but cheap coffee and our love for each other. And we succeeded. By our 7th year of marriage, Aegis had grown into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We had a beautiful home in the suburbs of Chicago and, most importantly, our beautiful daughter Lily. But success always extracts a toll. The grueling 80-hour work weeks finally caught up with me. I suffered a severe physical collapse, my heart and immune system failing under the immense stress of continuous overwork. The doctors gave me a grim ultimatum: step away or I would and oppose. Lived to see Lily grow up. I stepped down from my active role as co-CEO. Evelyn took the sole reins of Aegis, stepping into the spotlight, while I transitioned into a stay-at-home father. I managed the household, cooked the meals, raised Lily, and made sure Evelyn had a peaceful sanctuary to return to after her grueling days at the office. For a time, I believed we had found a new, beautiful balance. I was wrong. 3 years passed. I had strictly followed my medical regimen, rested, and slowly, the color returned to my face. My health was fully restored. But being a man of finance, my mind couldn't and oppose. Stay idle. During the hours Lily was at school, I began day trading from the small study in our home. What started as a hobby to keep my mind sharp snowballed. Using my deep understanding of the tech sector, I made aggressive, highly successful investments. Within 2 years, my private portfolio had vastly eclipsed the net worth of Aegis Tech. I had built an extensive, quiet network of Wall Street brokers and venture capitalists. I kept it all a secret. Our 10th wedding anniversary was only a few months away, and I planned to surprise Evelyn. I wanted to reveal my health, my wealth, and take her on a month-long tour across Europe to celebrate our triumphant return to equal footing. But Evelyn was changing. It started when she hired Julian Sterling as her new executive assistant. Julian was 25, fresh out of an Ivy League MBA program, charismatic and impeccably dressed. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged on a yacht, not fetching coffee. Slowly, Evelyn and Appo's late nights at the office became more frequent. Our dinner conversations dried up. When she looked at me, she didn't and Appo's. The man who helped build her empire. She saw a sick, domestic husband in an apron. Then, Aegis hit a massive roadblock. A crucial software patent was contested, and a major client pulled out. The company was bleeding money. When I tried to comfort her one evening, offering to look at the financials, she pulled her hand away. "Stop it, Ethan," she snapped, her voice dripping with exhaustion and disdain. "You wash dishes and pick up Lily from school. You don and oppose. Know the first thing about running a company anymore. Just leave me alone." I tried everything to hold the marriage together. For Lily's sake, I swallowed my pride. But the gap between us turned into a canyon. Julian, it turned out, came from a wealthy East Coast family. As Aegis was on the brink of bankruptcy, Julian pulled a few strings with his family and Appo's connections and secured a massive bailout contract that saved the company. Overnight, he went from an assistant to a savior in Evelyn and Appo's eyes. They were constantly together: business trips, late-night strategy dinners, weekend retreats. Evelyn practically stopped coming home. When she did, she was cold. The disrespect soon trickled down to her family. During a Thanksgiving dinner at her parents' and Apo's estate, her father openly mocked me. It and Apo's. "Es a shame Evelyn has to carry the weight of two men," her father sneered over his wine glass. Julian was telling us about the new merger. Thank God she has someone with actual ambition around her. Tell me, Ethan, did you figure out how to get that stain out of the living room rug yet? Evelyn didn't and Apo's. Defend me. She just looked away. They treated Lily and me like unwanted guests in our own family. I realized then that the woman I fell in love with in college was dead. The climax arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Evelyn walked into the house, Julian waiting outside in his Porsche. She threw a sleek folder onto the kitchen island. "I and Apo's am filing for divorce," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. I looked at the papers. "Evelyn, what is this?" "I and Apo's am done, Ethan. I and Apo's am moving forward, and you and Apo's holding me back. You and Apo's sick, you and Apo's irrelevant, and I can and Apo's do this anymore." Her eyes were ice. "I and Apo's am taking the company. You abandoned it years ago anyway. I and Apo's am taking the house, and I and Apo's am filing for full custody of Lily. You have no job, no income, and a history of severe illness. No judge will give her to you. You and Apo's Ella leave with nothing." She wanted to erase me completely. She wanted to take my daughter. What Evelyn didn't and Apo's Tino was that weeks prior, seeing the writing on the wall. I had quietly moved every single cent of my massive stock market fortune into an ironclad, irrevocable offshore trust in Lily and Apo's name, of which I was the sole trustee. Legally, I had zero assets. I looked at my wife, feeling nothing but a profound, chilling clarity. "You want everything?" I asked softly. "Fine. Take the house. Take all my shares in Aegis. Take the cars, the bank accounts. I will walk out of here with just the clothes on my back and sign a completely uncontested divorce." She looked suspicious. "What in Apo's the catch?" "The catch," I said, my voice turning to steel, "is Lily. Give me full, undisputed custody of my daughter. You can have your empire, Evelyn. And you and Julian can have your child-free, high society life." Evelyn hesitated. But the sheer greed of keeping 100% of the marital assets without a messy legal battle, combined with the reality that Julian had no interest in playing stepfather to an 8-year-old, won over. She signed. I packed 2 suitcases, took Lily by the hand, and walked out into the rain. Evelyn thought I was moving into a cheap motel. Instead, a black town car picked us up and drove us to a stunning, fully furnished penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Property of the trust one managed for Lily. "Daddy, are we poor now?" Lily asked, holding her stuffed bear tightly as we walked into the grand living room. I knelt down and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. We are richer than we and Apo's we ever been." With the toxic weight of my marriage gone, I unleashed my full potential. I founded Vanguard Capital, a boutique financial investment firm. Because of the vast, quiet network I had built during my years sick at home, Vanguard exploded out of the gate. I was ruthless in the boardroom, brilliant in the markets. I enrolled Lily in the most prestigious, expensive private academy in the state. I made sure she had everything: horseback riding lessons, top-tier tutors, and most importantly, a father who was always there to tuck her in at night. It was during a high-stakes acquisition deal that I met Claire Montgomery. Claire was a senior partner at a rival firm. She was sharp, fiercely intelligent, with a warm, genuine smile that could disarm a room of cutthroat executives. We found ourselves constantly on the opposite sides of the negotiation table, fighting fiercely over decimal points by day, and eventually sharing scotch and laughing about it by night. Claire was everything Evelyn wasn't and Apo's She didn't and Apo's care about the image. She cared about the substance. When she found out I was a single father, she didn't and Apo's see it as baggage. One weekend, she joined Lily and me at the park. I watched as Claire, wearing a designer suit, kicked off her heels to run through the grass and play freeze tag with my daughter. Lily, who had been quiet and withdrawn since her mother abandoned her, laughed so hard she cried. In that moment, I knew I was looking at my future. Our business partnership blossomed into a deep, unwavering romance. A year later, Claire and I were married in an intimate ceremony on the coast. Claire formally adopted Lily, giving her the motherly love she had been starved of. Vanguard Capital continued to soar, eclipsing Aegis Tech's valuation tenfold. My life was perfect. It became even more perfect a year later when Claire gave birth to our son, Leo, a chubby, laughing baby boy who completed our family. I had a beautiful, loving wife, a brilliant daughter, a newborn son, and an empire of my own making. We were truly happy. But in the world of business, paths always cross eventually. And the consequences of Evelyn and Appo's choices were about to catch up with her. We decided to spend the winter holidays in Aspen, Colorado. It had been 3 years since the divorce, and our lives had settled into a beautiful, prosperous rhythm. We booked a private, sprawling chalet at the base of the mountains. Lily, now 11, was becoming an excellent skier, and little Leo was perfectly content being pulled around the snow in his sled by a laughing Claire. It was on our 4th evening, inside the dimly lit, exclusive dining room of the Little Nell, that the past violently collided with our present. We were seated at a VIP table near the roaring fireplace. Claire was wearing a stunning cashmere dress, softly feeding Leo a piece of bread, while Lily was excitedly recounting her afternoon on the slopes to me. I was just pouring a glass of vintage Bordeaux when a voice, sharp and chillingly familiar, cut through the warm ambience. "Ethan?" I froze. I turned around, and there she was, Evelyn. She stood frozen near the entrance of the dining room, draped in an extravagant fur coat, with Julian Sterling standing a step behind her. But the Evelyn I saw now looked different. The fierce, untouchable aura she used to carry had thinned. She looked tired, the lines of stress deeply etched around her eyes. Her gaze swept over our table, taking in the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. She looked at my tailored Tom Ford suit. She looked at the diamond tennis bracelet catching the firelight on Claire's wrist. She looked at Lily, who was dressed in high-end winter gear, looking healthy, radiant, and incredibly happy. And finally, her eyes landed on baby Leo. I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket. "Evelyn, what a surprise." She walked over slowly, leaving Julian behind. The sheer confusion on her face was almost palpable. I Don and Appos. Understand, she stammered, her eyes darting across the table again. "What are you doing here? This restaurant requires a membership. We're members." "Evelyn," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of the warmth I reserved for my family. Claire gracefully wiped her hands and stood up, offering a polite but guarded smile. "You must be Evelyn."
I'm Claire,
Ethan's wife. Evelyn didn't Appos. Shake her hand. Instead, a dark, ugly flush crept up her neck. The confusion in her eyes rapidly twisted into a potent, burning jealousy. This wasn't Appos. The script she had written in her head. She had convinced herself that walking away with everything would leave me destitute, broken, and struggling in some dingy apartment. She expected me to be a cautionary tale. Instead, she was staring at a man who had clearly surpassed her in every conceivable way. "Wife," Evelyn choked out, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of shock and indignation. She looked down at Lily. "Lily, you and Appos." Groaned so much, Lily stopped smiling. She looked at the woman who had abandoned her for a company and a younger man. My brave daughter simply gave a stiff, polite nod, grabbed Claire's hand, and turned her attention back to her plate. The rejection was silent, but it was deafening. Evelyn flinched as if she had been struck. She looked back at me, her eyes narrowing as the gears in her head turned, trying to calculate how the sick, penniless stay-at-home husband she discarded had managed to secure a life of such obvious, staggering wealth. Julian finally walked up, looking uneasy. "Evie, our table is ready. Let Appos go." He gave me a stiff nod, which I didn't and oppose. T return. Enjoy your dinner, Evelyn, I said dismissively, taking my seat and turning my attention back to my wife and children. She lingered for a second too long, her hands balled into fists at her sides, her eyes lingering on the happy, wealthy family that she had thrown away. Without another word, she turned and marched toward her table. Throughout the rest of the dinner, I could feel her gaze burning into my back from across the room. She was watching us, watching the way the waiters treated me with immense deference, watching the way Claire and I laughed together, watching the way Lily called Claire Mom when asking for the salt. As we walked back to our chalet that night, the cold mountain air felt heavier than before. Claire slipped her arm through mine, leaning her head on my shoulder. She and Oppos. "Es not going to let this go, Ethan," Claire said softly, her sharp instincts already assessing the situation. "I saw the way she looked at you. It wasn't an Oppos. T just surprise. It was resentment." "I know," I replied, pulling my wife closer. Evelyn was a creature of pride and greed. Seeing my success hadn't and Oppos. T just shocked her. It had deeply humiliated her. She had built her ego on the belief that she was the winner, the superior one. Now that illusion was shattered. I looked up at the dark, snow-filled sky. The peaceful chapter of our lives was pausing. I knew Evelyn, and I knew the darkness she was capable of when her ego was threatened. She would dig. She would find out about Vanguard Capital. She would realize the magnitude of the wealth I had built right under her nose. A storm was coming for my family. But this time, I wasn't Oppos. T, a sick, exhausted man trying to hold onto a dying marriage. I was a titan in my own right, with a beautiful wife and children to protect. And if Evelyn wanted a war, she was going to get one. After the encounter in Aspen, I didn't Oppos. T just wait passively for the storm to hit. I mapped its trajectory. I had my intelligence team at Vanguard Capital run a discreet, thorough background check on Aegis Tech and the Sterling family. What I discovered painted a pathetic picture of the life Evelyn had chosen over her own family. To truly understand the burning resentment in Evelyn's eyes that night at the Little Nell, you had to understand the toxic dynamic I had left behind. During my years of recovery, when I was managing the household, Evelyn and her parents hadn't Oppos. T just treated me like a husband pulling his weight. They had treated me like their own personal, highly educated, indentured servant. Whenever her parents visited, they reveled in bossing me around. I cooked their gourmet meals, fetched their coats, and absorbed their thinly veiled insults with a tight smile for the sake of peace. They felt like absolute royalty, kings and queens of a domestic empire where my only purpose was to cater to their whims. When I walked out with Lily, taking nothing but our clothes, they lost their favorite punching bag. They hired a fleet of professional housekeepers, of course, but paid staff Don and Oppos. T tolerate abuse. You can and Oppos. T humiliate a hired maid the way you can a husband you view as a failure. The royal feeling was gone. At first, her family completely dismissed my departure. They convinced themselves that I was simply throwing a pathetic temper tantrum. Evelyn and her parents genuinely believed that within 6 months, the harsh reality of the world would break me. They expected that a sick, penniless Ethan and a miserable Lily would inevitably come crawling back to their doorstep, begging for scraps of forgiveness. But as the years passed, the silence from my end grew deafening, and Evelyn's new reality proved to be a bitter pill to swallow. Aegis Tech hadn't Oppos. T crashed, but without my silent guidance and the innovative spark I used to provide behind the scenes, the company had flatlined. It was stagnant. As for Julian Sterling, her knight in shining armor, he was the quintessential product of nepotism. He was a rich kid with a silver tongue, brilliant at schmoozing at cocktail parties, but utterly useless when it came to the grueling, unglamorous grind of actual management. Worse still, Julian was useless at home. He was a man accustomed to being served, not serving. When the housekeepers inevitably quit because of Evelyn's impossible, stress-fueled standards, Julian wooed and Oppos. T lift a finger to help. The woman who had divorced me because I was too domestic found herself rolling up her designer sleeves to scrub her own kitchen counters and do the laundry, exhausting herself after 14-hour days at the office. The headache didn't and Appos. T stopped there. Her parents, entirely lacking in self-awareness, continued to demand the royal treatment. They constantly called, demanding that Evelyn and Julian come over to fix things around their estate, serve them dinner, or chauffeur them to events. Julian flat out refused, leading to explosive arguments. Evelyn was left trapped in the middle, managing a stagnant company, an entitled new partner, and impossibly demanding parents. My investigators uncovered something else. 2. Evelyn had actively tried to track me down over the past 2 years. It wasn't and Appos. T out of remorse or a sudden desire to see her daughter. It was born from a twisted, desperate need for validation. Her life was crumbling under the weight of stress, and she needed the ego boost of seeing me miserable. She needed to look down on me to feel better about her own choices. But because I had moved to a different city and shielded my personal life behind Vanguard Capital and Appos' corporate veils, she had hit a dead end every time. The inability to find me, to confirm my supposed misery, had driven her insane. And then Aspen happened. Seeing me there shattered the delusion she had clung to for 3 years. I wasn't an Appos, T broken. I wasn't an Appos, T poor. I was thriving, draped in wealth, married to a stunning, brilliant woman, and raising the daughter she had discarded, alongside a new son. In her twisted mind, my success was the ultimate betrayal. How dared I? Who gave me the permission, the right to be rich and happy after leaving her? I was supposed to be the loser in her story. Instead, I had become the ghost that haunted her. A ghost who had quietly built an empire while she was suffocating in the mess she had made. The jealousy I saw in her eyes wasn't an Appos. T just about money. It was the devastating realization that I was the best thing she had ever had, and she had thrown me away. And I knew with absolute certainty that she was going to try and tear my new life apart. The peace we had carefully cultivated didn't and Appos. T last long after Aspen. Evelyn and her parents, armed with the address they had finally managed to dig up, descended upon our lives like a plague. It started on a Saturday morning. The intercom at our estate's main gate buzzed, and the security guard informed me that my former in-laws had arrived, demanding entry under the pretense of exercising their rights to visit their granddaughter. Reluctantly, I allowed them through the gates, wanting to see what their game was. Evelyn and Appos' parents stepped out of their town car and marched up to my front door as if they owned the place. They hadn't an Appos. T changed a bit. The moment they crossed the threshold, her father handed his heavy winter coat to me without looking, expecting me to hang it up. The flight was atrocious, Ethan, her mother complained, inspecting the grand foyer of our home with thinly veiled envy. Go put a pot of coffee on, and make sure it's the dark roast. Then go fetch Lily. We Don and Appos T have all day. They actually thought the dynamic was the same. They thought I was still their obedient servant, ready to bow and scrape at their command. The sheer audacity was almost laughable. I let the heavy wool coat drop onto the marble floor. Her father stopped and glared at me. What is the meaning of this? Pick that up. You seem to be gravely mistaken about where you are and who you are speaking to, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This is not your daughter and Appos' house. I am not your maid, and you are not welcome here. Get out. Their faces turned purple with rage. The illusion of their domestic royalty had just been shattered to their faces. They began to scream, hurling insults, demanding to see Lily, and calling me an ungrateful parasite who had somehow stolen their daughter and Appos' wealth. The noise brought Claire out to the top of the stairs, holding a frightened Leo. I wanted Appos. T ask again, I said, stepping toward them. Leave. When they refused, puffing out their chests in a pathetic display of dominance, I didn't an Appos. T argue. I simply pressed the button on my smartwatch to summon our private estate security. Within 2 minutes, 3 burly guards physically escorted Evelyn and Appos' screaming, thrashing parents off the property. They stood on the sidewalk outside our iron gates, hysterical and humiliated, cursing my name until the neighbors started to stare. But they didn't an Appos. T stopped there. Denied access to my home, They shifted their focus to the most vulnerable target, Lily. A few days later, they ambushed her outside the gates of her private academy. They cornered her as she was waiting for her driver, aggressively grabbing her arm, demanding to know about my finances, and whispering poisonous lies about Claire. Lily came home trembling and in tears. The next morning, she was too terrified to even get out of bed for school. The stress began to blanket our home. Claire, who had always been a pillar of calm, was growing deeply exhausted by the constant vigilance. I saw the dark circles under her eyes as she rocked Leo to sleep, jumping slightly at every unexpected sound outside. "Ethan, we can and Oppos. T live like this," Claire whispered one night, looking out the window toward the front gates. "Lily is terrified. I and Oppos. M checking over my shoulder every time I go to the grocery store. They are unhinged." "I know," I said, pulling her into an embrace. "I and Oppos. M handling it." The next morning, I went straight to the police and filed for immediate restraining orders against Evelyn and her parents. Given the security footage from our estate and the witness statements from Lily and Oppos' school, the judge granted them swiftly. But as I walked out of the courthouse, holding the official documents, I felt no relief. I knew exactly how people like Evelyn and her parents operated. To them, a police order was just a piece of paper. They believed their wealth and status made them untouchable. The police could keep them physically away for a while, but it Wooden and Oppos. T stopped the underlying entitlement, the stalking, and the vindictive attempts to ruin my peace. This was merely a temporary shield. If I wanted to protect my wife, my son, and my daughter permanently, I couldn't and Oppos. T just play defense. I had to cure the disease at its source. Evelyn and her family drew their arrogance from their perceived superiority and their financial stability. It was time to take that away. It was time to use Vanguard capital not just to build my future, but to dismantle theirs. I never claimed to be a saint, but I wasn't an Oppos, T a monster either. Even after everything they had done to me, I had walked away without seeking revenge. But there is a fundamental truth about human nature. When you push a good man into a corner, especially a father protecting his children, you force his hand to do dark things. My goal was and Oppos, T to completely annihilate them. I still had enough humanity left to avoid going for the throat. I simply needed to create a diversion so massive, so all-consuming, that they Wooden and Oppos. T have a single second of the day left to think about me, Claire, or my children. They needed to learn how to survive on their own. I sat in my corner office at Vanguard Capital, the city lights reflecting off the glass, and orchestrated their temporary downfall. The first strike was surgical, aimed directly at Evelyn's pride and joy, Aegis Tech. Through my intelligence gathering, I knew Aegis was heavily relying on a massive line of credit from a major investment bank to fund their upcoming quarter. They were barely treading water. Using Vanguard's immense leverage and my deep connections within the financial sector, I quietly made a few phone calls. I didn't and Oppos T have to break any laws. I just pointed out the glaring vulnerabilities in Aegis and Oppos' latest financial reports to the right risk assessment officers. The bank panicked. Within 48 hours, Aegis Tech's credit lines were frozen, and their primary investors demanded an immediate audit. Evelyn and Oppos' world instantly caught fire. She and Julian were dragged into an endless nightmare of emergency boardroom meetings, frantic calls to creditors, and a desperate scramble to find bridge financing. She was effectively trapped in her office, forced to pour every ounce of her blood, sweat, and tears into keeping her company from going into foreclosure. She no longer had the luxury of obsessing over my life. The second strike was aimed at her entitled parents, to ensure they were just as preoccupied. Evelyn had a younger brother, Thomas, who was currently studying abroad in London. In reality, he was living a playboy lifestyle on his parents' and Oppos' dime. I knew Thomas was arrogant, reckless, and had a crippling weakness for high-stakes sports betting, a secret he kept hidden from his family. I didn't and Oppos T have to force him into anything. I just laid out the bait. Through a discreet proxy, I had Thomas introduced to a very exclusive, very aggressive private lending syndicate that catered to wealthy, foolish expatriates. Predictably, Thomas took the money to fund his lavish lifestyle and fuel his gambling habits. When he inevitably lost it all, the syndicate didn't and Oppos. Play nice. They immediately called his emergency contacts. The fallout was spectacular. Evelyn's parents woke up to the terrifying reality that their golden boy was in hundreds of thousands of dollars of immediate, high-interest debt. And the people holding the markers were not the kind you could simply ignore. The grand estate that used to be their kingdom became a war room of panic. They were forced to liquidate assets, drain their savings, and deal with international lawyers to bail their son out of a disastrous situation. Suddenly, my front gates were quiet. The stalking stopped. There were no more unhinged phone calls to Lily's school. Evelyn and her parents were completely engulfed in the chaos of their own making. They were too busy cleaning up a battlefield to launch an attack on mine. As I sat down for dinner that weekend, listening to Claire laugh at something Lily said, while Leo babbled happily in his high chair, I felt the heavy tension in our home finally lift. I knew my tactics were only a temporary fix. Financial crises could be managed, and debts could eventually be paid. But for now, I had bought my family the peace we deserved. And if Evelyn's family ever decided to look my way again, they would know exactly what happens when you wake a sleeping giant. My calculated diversion was supposed to buy us time, but I underestimated the sheer, venomous audacity of Evelyn's family. The chaos of the London syndicate forced Evelyn's parents to bring Thomas back to the States. I expected him to return with his tail between his legs, humbled by the mess he had created. Instead, he returned with a bruised ego and a head full of malicious schemes. Thomas was a parasite who had spent his entire life living off others, and the moment he realized the extent of my new wealth, he saw me as his ultimate bailout. He poisoned his parents and Oppos' minds, convincing them that since I had stolen my wealth while married to Evelyn, it rightfully belonged to their family. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. In their twisted reality, I was legally and morally obligated to save them. The harassment escalated to a terrifying degree. They stopped being a nuisance and became a full-blown siege. They ambushed me at the gates of my estate, screaming demands through the iron bars. When that failed, they brought their circus to the pristine glass lobby of Vanguard Capital. Evelyn's father and Thomas stood in the center of my firm in Oppos' reception area, shouting at my security detail, demanding that I write a check to pay off the London gangsters and inject emergency capital to save Aegis Tech. It was a pathetic, hysterical display of entitlement. I had them forcibly removed and called the police. They were arrested for trespassing and violating the restraining order. I thought the sight of handcuffs would finally snap them back to reality. But I was wrong. The police intervention only bought us a 48-hour reprieve. 2 days after making bail, they were back, circling our lives like desperate vultures. They even tried to follow Claire's car on her way to the grocery store. The fear returned to my wife's eyes. Lily was having nightmares again. I realized then that my previous strategy was flawed. I had treated them like rational people who would back off when faced with a crisis. But they weren't and Oppos' rational. They were rabid. Distracting them wasn't and Oppos' enough. I needed to cut the ground out from under them entirely. I sat down with my top acquisitions team at Vanguard and shifted from defense to a scorched earth offense. Within a week, the invisible hand of Vanguard Capital closed around Evelyn's throat. I reached out to Aegis Tech's remaining major clients, many of whom I had personal relationships with from my time building the company. I offered them superior software solutions through Vanguard's tech subsidiaries at a fraction of the cost. The exodus was immediate. Following suit, Aegis's crucial hardware suppliers suddenly altered their terms, demanding cash upfront for all future orders. Aegis, already bleeding money, was paralyzed. But my masterstroke was real estate. Aegis Tech operated out of a prime, 3-story commercial building in the city and Oppos' tech district. Through a series of shell companies, I quietly entered aggressive negotiations with the building and Oppos' owners. I offered them 20% above market value to buy the property outright in cash. Once the ink dried on that contract, I would literally own the roof over Evelyn and Apo's head. I would be her landlord, and I fully intended to serve her an immediate eviction notice. However, bringing down the company Wasn and Apo's enough to break their spirit. To truly end this war, I needed to destroy the illusion Evelyn clung to the most. I turned my full, unblinking attention to Julian Sterling. Evelyn and Apo's new husband was supposed to be the golden boy, the high society savior who was superior to me in every way. But as my private investigators dug deeper into his background, his finances, and his so-called elite business deals, the facade began to crack. Julian Wasn and Apo's savior. He was a fraud. And the deeper I dug into the exact nature of the miracle contract he had supposedly secured to save Aegis years ago, the more I realized he was the rotting core of Evelyn's crumbling empire. He was the fatal weakness, the linchpin that, once pulled, would ensure Aegis Tech and Evelyn and Apo's ego could never rise again. I smiled as I read the latest dossier on Mr. Sterling. The trap was set. It was time to pull the trigger. The dossier sitting on my mahogany desk was the final nail in the coffin of Evelyn and Apo's delusions. My investigators had dug past the polished, Ivy League veneer of Julian Sterling and found a rotting foundation. Julian Wasn and Apo's the golden heir to a high society dynasty. He was a carefully managed secret. He was the illegitimate son of Richard Sterling, a powerful corporate titan, and his former secretary. For 25 years, Richard had secretly funded Julian's luxurious lifestyle, buying him degrees and cars to keep him quiet and away from his actual family. The real power in the Sterling Empire was and Apo's Richard. It was his legitimate wife, Eleanor. Eleanor came from old, ruthless money. She sat on the board of their holding company and fiercely protected the inheritance of her two legitimate children. She had no idea that millions of her family and Apo's wealth were being siphoned off to support her husband and Apo's bastard son. This was the linchpin. Evelyn had married Julian believing he was her ticket to the elite tier of society. She thought his family connections would save Aegis Tech. But Julian had no real power. He was a parasite living on stolen time and hush money. I didn't and Apo's need to confront him. I simply compiled a beautiful, devastatingly precise package of evidence. Birth certificates, offshore bank transfer records, and photographs of Richard secretly meeting with Julian. I placed it all into an unmarked, heavy envelope and had it delivered via private courier directly into the hands of Eleanor Sterling. I had lit the match and tossed it into the powder keg. I knew the moment Eleanor opened that envelope, Julian's world, and by extension, Evelyn's, would be incinerated. Eleanor would cut off his funding instantly, freeze his assets, and likely destroy Aegis Tech just for being associated with him. Meanwhile, there was still the matter of Thomas. Evelyn and Apo's brother had learned absolutely nothing from his near-death experience with the London syndicate. Back in the States, stripped of his allowance, his addiction only grew more desperate. He was a rat trapped in a maze, looking for the easiest piece of cheese. I gave it to him. Through a web of anonymous proxies, I made sure Thomas received an exclusive invitation to a high-stakes, underground poker ring on the edge of the city. I also made sure he was offered an unsecured line of credit by a shadowy backer to play at the table. It was a trap he was too arrogant and foolish to resist. When he inevitably gambled away money he didn't and Apo's have. Money that this time belonged to very local, very unforgiving people. There would be no parents left with the funds to bail him out. He was walking straight into a cage of his own making, and I was going to lock the door. Despite all this, Evelyn and her parents were still trying to breach the walls of my life. The desperation of their failing company and drowning son made them erratic. They would park down the street from our estate or wait outside Vanguard Capital, screaming threats at my staff. But their harassment had hit a literal brick wall. I was done playing games with police restraining orders. I hired a private, elite security firm staffed by ex-military contractors. 2 black SUVs now trailed Claire wherever she went. A highly trained bodyguard escorted Lily to and from her classroom. Anytime Evelyn's parents even stepped foot within a 2-block radius of my family, They were immediately intercepted by men who did not smile and did not ask politely. Simultaneously, I unleashed the most vicious family law attorney's money could buy. We filed aggressive legal motions to permanently and irrevocably sever any and all grandparents and oppos. Rights. We cited stalking, emotional abuse, and criminal harassment. We built a legal fortress around Lily that no judge would ever dare dismantle. Sitting in my study that evening, I watched the security monitors showing the quiet, heavily guarded perimeter of my estate. Upstairs, Claire was reading a bedtime story to Lily, and Leo was fast asleep. My family was finally safe. Across the city, the time bombs I had planted under Evelyn's life were ticking down to zero. The illusion she had sacrificed my heart and our daughter to build was about to shatter. Eleanor Sterling was not a woman who forgave, and she certainly was not a woman who shared. When my anonymous dossier landed on her mahogany desk, she didn't oppose. Just get mad. She went to war. She unleashed a ruthless team of corporate auditors and private investigators who confirmed every single damning detail within 48 hours. Faced with the wrath of his billionaire wife and the terrifying threat of being ousted from the empire her family controlled, Richard Sterling folded instantly. He abandoned his former secretary and threw his illegitimate son to the wolves. He begged Eleanor for forgiveness, stepping back from his executive duties and effectively handing his wife the scythe to reap her vengeance. And reap she did. Overnight, Julian's entire world evaporated. His trust fund was frozen, his black cards were canceled, and his luxury penthouse, which technically belonged to the Sterling Holding Company, was repossessed. Panicked, penniless, and desperate, Julian ran to the only safety net he thought he had left, Evelyn. He rushed home, confessing the truth and begging his wife to support him. He wanted her to use Aegis Tech and Oppos' remaining funds to hire elite lawyers so he could fight his father for a slice of the inheritance. But Julian had made a fatal miscalculation. He had never truly understood the nature of the family he had married into. Evelyn and her parents had never loved Julian. They had only loved the Sterling name and the illusion of his bottomless wealth. The moment they realized he was a fraud, an illegitimate exile with zero financial value, their masks slipped off with terrifying speed. There was no sympathy. There were no vows of for better or for worse There was only ruthless, venomous self-preservation. Evelyn didn't oppose. Comfort him. She dragged him to the foyer and literally threw his designer luggage out the front door. She slammed hastily drafted divorce papers onto the table, demanding he sign them immediately. Julian, arrogant and entitled to the bitter end, refused. He sneered, threatening to drag out the divorce and demanding a massive alimony payout from Aegis Tech to leave quietly. He forgot that cornered animals are the most vicious. Evelyn and Oppos' family didn't oppose. Hesitate or negotiate. They tore their faces off and showed their true cruelty. They changed the locks, canceled his access to the company, and had the police physically drag him off the property, citing a fabricated domestic disturbance. They excised Julian from their lives with the clinical, merciless precision of removing a tumor. But excising Julian didn't oppose. Solved their ultimate problem. Aegis Tech was still drowning, their supplier contracts were dead, and the walls were closing in. In their twisted, desperate minds, there was only one savior left: me. With Julian gone, their delusion reached a fever pitch. They actually convinced themselves that since they had gotten rid of the mistake, the path was clear for me to return and rescue them. They believed that because I was once a devoted husband, I would simply step in, inject Vanguard Capital and Oppos' money into their dying company, and restore their high society glory. They threw themselves against my security perimeter with a maddening, hysterical intensity. They bypassed my blocked numbers by calling Vanguard's public corporate lines dozens of times a day. They showed up at the edge of my estate, pacing the sidewalk just beyond the reach of my private military contractors, screaming over the gates that we were family and that I had a moral duty to save them. Ethan, please, we got rid of him. Evelyn screamed one afternoon, her voice cracking as my guards blocked her path. It and Appos. "Es just us now. You have to help us." End quote. They thought this was the climax of their suffering. They thought throwing themselves at my iron gates was the worst their lives could get. They were completely wrong. As I watched them on the security monitors from the quiet, warm comfort of my study, sipping my coffee while Claire played the piano in the next room, I didn't in Appos feel anger anymore. I just felt a cold, calculated patience. They were wasting their final ounces of energy screaming at my walls, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing on a landmine. The second bomb, the trap I had carefully laid for her brother, Thomas, at the underground poker tables, had just hit zero. They thought they had time to harass me, but the people Thomas now owed money to were about to knock on their front door, and they were not the kind of people who asked politely. The second bomb detonated on a Tuesday evening, and it was entirely out of my hands. The shadowy backers who had funded Thomas's disastrous run at the underground poker tables didn't and Appos send polite collection letters. They sent 3 men in tailored suits with broken noses to the front gates of Evelyn's parents and Appos estate. They didn't and Appos yell or scream like Evelyn and Appos' family did. They simply handed her father a ledger, explained exactly what would happen to Thomas and Appos' kneecaps if the massive debt was and Appos settled within 48 hours and quietly drove away. Evelyn and her parents were plunged into an impossible, suffocating nightmare. The debt was astronomical. If they drained Aegis Tech's remaining operational capital to pay off the gangsters, the company would instantly default, triggering immediate bankruptcy and the total collapse of their legacy. But if they didn't in Appos pay Thomas, their golden, spoiled boy would be tortured or worse. In their absolute panic, they did the only thing they knew how to do. They tried to use me as their shield. My phone was flooded with frantic voicemails from Evelyn, her voice stripped of all its former arrogance, replaced by raw, sobbing terror. "Ethan, please, they and Appos. We're going to kill him. You have to give us the money. I beg you." They still didn't and Appos understand. I was no longer their safety net. I was the architect of their reality check. It was time to play my final hand in the corporate arena. That same morning, the massive real estate acquisition I had initiated weeks prior was finalized. The title for the prime commercial building housing Aegis Tech was officially transferred to a subsidiary of Vanguard Capital. I didn't in Appos answer Evelyn and Appos' frantic calls. Instead, I sent my lead corporate attorney directly to her office with a certified letter. When Evelyn tore open the envelope, expecting a lifeline, she found a formal notice of new ownership. Attached to it was an ultimatum drafted with ruthless legal precision. Vanguard Capital was now her landlord. If she, her parents, or her brother ever attempted to contact me, my wife, or my children again, by phone, by mail, or in person, her company and Appos' lease would be immediately terminated or the rent would be increased by 400%, effective immediately. I had them by the throat. I was holding the absolute survival of their precious company in my hands, and I made it crystal clear that I would crush it to dust if they took one step closer to my family. They were backed into a corner, terrified of the loan sharks and terrified of eviction. But toxic, narcissistic people do not surrender gracefully. Realizing that I was an impenetrable fortress, their twisted minds made one last, despicable pivot. They decided that if they couldn't in Appos reach me, they would try to manipulate my daughter. They began plotting to ambush Lily, hoping to use a frightened, confused 11-year-old as an emotional hostage to force my hand. But I was already 10 steps ahead of them. The moment I anticipated they might shift their focus back to Lily, I unleashed the full fury of the legal system. I didn't in Appos just want a restraining order. I wanted an absolute, irreversible severing of ties. My legal team filed a massive, airtight petition in family court. We submitted hundreds of pages of evidence. The security footage of their unhinged harassment, police reports, sworn affidavits from Lily's school, financial audits proving their instability, and, most damningly, the police records and private investigator reports detailing Thomas's active, dangerous ties to violent organized crime. We argued that any contact with her maternal family posed a direct, severe, an imminent threat to my daughter's physical safety and psychological well-being. I sat in my study, signing the final affidavit with a steady hand. Claire stood behind me, resting her hands on my shoulders. "Is it done?" she asked softly. "It will be," I replied, looking up at the woman who had helped me rebuild my soul. "They wanted a war, and I and Appos am ending it. They will never come near our daughter again." I was drawing a permanent line in the sand. I was prepared to spend every dollar of Vanguard capital and Appos' fortune to build a legal wall so high that Evelyn and her toxic family would never be able to look over it. My family was going to have peace no matter what it took. I thought I had seen the absolute bottom of their depravity. I thought cornering them legally and financially would force them to finally accept defeat. But I had underestimated the toxic ingenuity of a family that had nothing left to lose. Blocked by my security forces, silenced by the courts, and drowning in debt, Thomas proposed a desperate, bold new strategy. If they couldn't and Appos reach me in the physical world, they would destroy me in the digital one. They decided to weaponize public morality. It started on a Sunday evening. Evelyn, her face devoid of makeup to look pale and exhausted, went live on a major social media platform. Flanked by her weeping mother and a somber-looking Thomas, they staged an Oscar-worthy performance of absolute tragedy. They twisted the narrative so violently it made me sick to my stomach. Evelyn cried to the camera, claiming that I was a vindictive, abusive narcissist who had drained their company's resources and abandoned her when she was vulnerable. She spun a web of lies, telling millions of strangers that I had somehow stolen our daughter using my newfound wealth and was holding Lily hostage, refusing to let a grieving grandmother see her only grandchild. The internet, always hungry for a villain, swallowed the bait whole. Within hours, the live stream went viral. They clipped the most emotional, tear-filled moments and spread them across every platform. They monetized their manufactured grief, setting up donation links to save their family from the cruel billionaire who had ruined them. The mob mentality was swift and brutal. Internet sleuths doxed me. By Monday morning, Vanguard Capital's public email servers were crashing under the weight of thousands of death threats and hate mail. Our corporate social media pages were review-bombed into oblivion. Paparazzi and amateur streamers began lurking near my office building, trying to get a shot of the monster. The smear campaign was affecting my firm's reputation, but worse, it was threatening the sanctity of my family. Claire had to delete her social media accounts to escape the vitriol. Standing in my office, watching a clip of Evelyn sobbing over how much she missed her little girl. The same little girl she had willingly traded for a company and a younger man. Something inside me permanently broke. Jetam. My heart went entirely cold. Any lingering shred of pity, any microscopic drop of humanity I had reserved for the woman I once loved and the family I once served, evaporated. I realized they were not just entitled or desperate. They were fundamentally, irredeemably evil. They were willing to burn my daughter and Appos' peace to the ground just to stay warm. I called off my lawyers. When my PR team rushed in, panicked and demanding we issue immediate cease and desist letters and public denials, I raised my hand and stopped them. "No," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Let them talk." I realized that fighting the internet mob right now would only make me look defensive. If Evelyn and Thomas wanted a public stage, I wasn't and Appos going to pull the curtain down. I was going to give them the biggest stadium in the world. There is an old saying, the higher a monkey climbs, the more you see of its behind. Or simply, the higher they climb, the harder they fall. I contacted my shadow tech division at Vanguard. Instead of trying to suppress their live streams, I ordered my team to deploy sophisticated bot networks and algorithmic manipulation to artificially boost their content. I pumped untraceable money into their streams to push them to the absolute top of the trending pages globally. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn and Thomas became internet sensations. They did nightly live streams, basking in the adoration, the sympathy, and the millions of dollars in donations pouring in from gullible strangers. They grew arrogant. They felt invincible, believing they had finally found the weapon that would bring me to my knees. They didn't and Appos realized they were dancing on a trapdoor. I was building their audience to astronomical heights, ensuring that the entire world was watching them. Because when my counterattack finally landed, I didn't and oppose. T wanted to just ruin them privately. I wanted their destruction to be a global, inescapable spectacle. The digital witch hunt had reached its peak. It was time for my revenge. While Evelyn and her family were busy crying tears of deceit to millions of viewers, I was silently, methodically weaving the net that would strangle them. Behind the closed doors of Vanguard Capital, my legal team prepared the most devastating defamation and libel lawsuit in the history of the state. I didn't and oppose. T engage in internet mudslinging. I let the justice system do the heavy lifting. We presented the judge with a mountain of irrefutable evidence. The original divorce settlement Evelyn gleefully signed abandoning her rights to Lily, the financial logs proving she had bankrupted her own company, police reports of their harassment, and the undeniable proof of Thomas's massive gambling debts and ties to organized crime. The trial was swift, and the verdict was an absolute, crushing victory. The judge didn't and oppose. T just rule in my favor. He issued a scathing, on-the-record condemnation of Evelyn's family for their malicious, fabricated campaign of public manipulation. We were awarded an astronomical sum in punitive damages. But the money didn't and oppose. T mattered to me. It was the verdict itself I needed. The moment the gavel fell, I gave my tech division the green light. I didn't and oppose. T just issue a polite corporate press release. I used the very same algorithmic networks I had used to boost their live streams to drop the truth onto the internet with the force of a nuclear bomb. We released everything. The official court documents. The signed custody agreement proving Evelyn gave up Lily for money. The security footage of them aggressively demanding cash at my gates. But the most damning piece of all was the financial paper trail we exposed. The millions of dollars in donations they had collected from sympathetic viewers hadn't and oppose. T gone to saving their family, it had been funneled directly into offshore accounts to pay off Thomas's violent loan sharks. The internet's reaction was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The public, realizing they had been conned, weaponized their outrage. The backlash was biblical. The same people who had hailed Evelyn as a tragic victim now demanded her head. Cancel culture descended upon them with terrifying ferocity. Their social media accounts were obliterated. Dozens of furious, scammed donors gathered outside their grand estate, holding signs, screaming insults, and throwing trash over their walls. Evelyn, Thomas, and her parents were completely trapped inside their own home, too terrified to even look out the windows, let alone step outside. With them paralyzed by the social media firestorm, I executed the next phase. As the new owner of the commercial building housing Aegis Tech, I officially enacted the clause in my ultimatum. Because they had continued to harass my family via the internet, I raised the rent by an impossible 600%, due immediately. Aegis Tech, already bleeding out, flatlined. They couldn't and oppose. T-pay. I served them an immediate eviction notice, forcing them to haul their servers and desks out onto the street in the dead of night to avoid the paparazzi. Without a physical office, and with their public reputation utterly destroyed, the company and Oppo's valuation dropped to zero. Sensing the blood in the water, the London loan sharks finally moved in. The grace period was over. Faced with the immediate, physical threat to Thomas and Oppo's life, Evelyn was forced into a desperate fire sale. She liquidated Aegis Tech, the empire we had built together, the company she had traded me for, selling its remaining patents and assets for pennies on the dollar just to pay off the gangsters and save her brother's skin. Aegis Tech was dead. Julian was gone. Their public image was a burning ruin. As I reviewed the final financial reports, I noted that they Warren and Oppos. T completely destitute. The fire sale of Aegis and the liquidation of some stocks had paid off the mob, and they still owned their sprawling, luxurious family estate and a few minor investment properties. They still had a comfortable cushion of cash. In their minds, they thought they had survived the worst. They thought they could retreat behind the high walls of their mansion and live out the rest of their days in quiet, disgraced luxury. But they were wrong. They had tried to destroy my reputation. They had tried to weaponize the world against my wife. They had tried to terrorize my daughter. I wasn't and Oppos. T going to let them retreat to a comfortable retirement. I was going to strip them down to the studs. I was going to take the very ground they walked on. The final blow was coming, and it would be absolute. Julian Sterling's fall from grace had been absolute. Eleanor Sterling didn't and oppose. T just cut him off financially. She professionally blacklisted him. With a few phone calls from her, Julian became utterly radioactive in the corporate world. No firm would hire him, no bank would loan to him, and none of his high society friends would even return his calls. My private investigators kept a close eye on him, reporting his rapid descent. He was currently living in a dilapidated, roach-infested studio apartment in one of the poorest, most dangerous neighborhoods on the edge of the city. He had pawned his designer watches just to make rent. The man who used to dine on caviar and Wagyu beef was now struggling to afford canned soup. He was miserable, hungry, and dangerously cornered. But as I read the psychological profiles my team had built on him, I realized something fascinating. Julian was operating under a massive delusion. In his arrogant mind, he hadn't and oppose. T been permanently discarded by Evelyn. He genuinely believed that Evelyn forcing him out and making him sign divorce papers was a desperate, tactical theater. He thought she was simply throwing him to the wolves temporarily to protect Aegis Tech from Eleanor's crosshairs. Julian had convinced himself that because his, albeit fraudulent, connections had saved the company years ago, he was still entitled to a massive share of it. He believed that if he just laid low and suffered through this poverty for a little while, the storm would pass. Eleanor would eventually cool off, and Evelyn would welcome him back with open arms to share in the wealth of the company he thought he helped secure. He thought he was a temporary scapegoat. He had no idea the slaughterhouse was already closed. It was time to wake him up. It was time to hand him a match and point him toward the gasoline. From the pristine comfort of my office at Vanguard Capital, I orchestrated an anonymous delivery. A plain, unmarked manila envelope was slid under the rotting wooden door of Julian's squalid apartment. Inside was a single, heavily redacted financial ledger, accompanied by a copy of the official bill of sale for Aegis Tech. I made sure the numbers were highlighted in bright, fluorescent yellow. The documents told a very clear, undeniable story. Aegis Tech was and oppose, T being preserved. It had been completely liquidated, sold for scraps, and the millions of dollars generated from the fire sale hadn't and oppose. T been hidden away in a trust for Julian to eventually claim. The money had been immediately wired to offshore accounts belonging to a violent London crime syndicate to pay off Thomas's gambling debts. I could only imagine the look on Julian and Oppo's face as he sat on his stained mattress, reading those papers under a flickering bulb. The realization must have hit him like a freight train. He hadn't and Oppo's been temporarily hidden away to protect the empire. He had been permanently thrown in the trash. Every single drop of equity, every ounce of value from the company he thought he owned a piece of, had been burned to the ground just to save Evelyn's worthless, parasitic younger brother. Julian had suffered in squalor, starving and humiliated, clinging to the hope of a triumphant return. Now he knew the truth. There was no company left to return to. Evelyn had betrayed him, robbed him of his perceived investment, and left him to rot in the slums, while she and her family retreated to their luxurious estate. My investigators reported the shift immediately. Julian didn't and oppose. T break down and cry. He didn't and oppose. T sink into depression. He exploded. The security detail assigned to watch him reported that he tore his apartment apart in a blind, screaming rage. The resentment and entitlement that had been festering inside him under the weight of his poverty finally reached a boiling point. The delusion of his grand return was dead, replaced by a pure, unadulterated thirst for vengeance. I smiled, turning back to my monitors. The fire inside Julian was now a roaring inferno. I didn't and oppose. Need to lift a finger against Evelyn and Oppo's family anymore. I had just armed their most volatile enemy, and he was already walking right toward their front door. Fueled by the devastating revelation of the ledger, Julian Sterling marched straight to the gates of Evelyn's family estate. He was a man possessed, screaming through the iron bars, demanding to see his wife, demanding his rightful cut of the company's liquidation. He raged that he had sacrificed his standing with his own father to save them, and he wasn't T going to let them steal millions while he starved in the slums. But Evelyn didn't T come to the gate. Her parents didn't T even look out the window. They treated him exactly the way they had treated me. Like a ghost, a nuisance beneath their notice. They simply ignored him, leaving him to scream until his throat was raw. When ignoring him didn't T work, Thomas stepped in. Evelyn's brother, emboldened by the fact that his gambling debts were paid and his kneecaps were safe, decided to play the tough guy. He didn't T confront Julian himself, of course. Instead, Thomas used a fraction of their remaining cash to hire 3 local enforcers. As Julian walked back toward the bus stop that evening, defeated and exhausted, the thugs ambushed him in a dark alley. The beating was brutal and methodical. They left him bleeding on the concrete with a fractured rib, a swollen eye, and a very clear message. If he ever came within a mile of the estate again, the next beating would be his last. The following morning, my head of security placed the private investigator's report and the accompanying photographs of Julian's battered face on my desk. I stared at the images for a long time. The silence in my office was heavy. Julian Sterling was a fraud, an arrogant playboy who had gladly stepped into my shoes and slept in my bed. I should have felt nothing but satisfaction. But instead, a cold, heavy sadness settled in my chest. Looking at Julian, broken and discarded, I saw a dark reflection of my own past. I remembered the nights I had collapsed from exhaustion, managing their household while they mocked my illness. I remembered the sheer, freezing cruelty in Evelyn's eyes when she handed me divorce papers and told me I was worthless. We were both just tools to them, used until we were broken and then violently thrown away. Despite everything, my humanity won out over my malice. I couldn't just watch him be destroyed by them. I made a phone call. I hired one of the most vicious, relentless family law attorneys in the state. A man completely unaffiliated with Vanguard Capital, so my involvement would remain untraceable. I paid his retainer in full and sent him to the rundown clinic where Julian was getting his ribs taped. The lawyer offered Julian a lifeline, pro bono representation to sue Evelyn and her family for everything they had, to contest the eviction, and to drag them into a brutal, public civil court battle for his share of the marital assets. Julian, desperate for a savior, eagerly agreed. I thought this would be the avenue for Julian's justice. I thought we had them cornered, but I had profoundly underestimated the sheer, reptilian cunning of my former in-laws. When my proxy lawyer filed the initial motions, Evelyn's legal team didn't T panic. They didn't T even flinch. Within 24 hours, they countered with a single, devastatingly simple document. It was a fully executed, notarized divorce settlement. My reports had said Julian refused to sign the papers on the night they threw him out. And he had. But Evelyn's family had been plotting his disposal long before Eleanor Sterling froze his trust fund. Months prior, under the guise of restructuring Aegis Tech's corporate shielding to protect his assets from his father's prying eyes, Evelyn had handed Julian a mountain of dense, complex legal paperwork to sign. Julian, arrogant and entirely trusting of the woman who constantly validated his ego, had signed the stack without reading it. Hidden within those corporate documents was an ironclad, unassailable post-nuptial agreement and an uncontested divorce waiver, effectively stripping him of any and all claims to Evelyn's assets, properties, or cash. He had legally walked away with absolutely nothing long before he was ever thrown out the front door. My lawyer called me that afternoon, his voice heavy with defeat. The documents were bulletproof. There was no legal loophole, no claim of duress that would hold up against a judge. Julian had signed his own financial death warrant. The lawyer had no choice but to drop the case. Julian Sterling was entirely out of options. The law couldn't T help him. I couldn't T help him. He was trapped in a squalid apartment, nursing broken ribs, with empty pockets and a head full of violent, burning rage. The system had failed him, and I knew with a terrifying certainty What happens to a desperate man when he realizes he has absolutely nothing left to lose? Winter thawed into a bitter spring, and the dust of our war seemed to finally settle. In his decaying, roach-infested apartment, Julian Sterling slowly physically healed from the brutal beating Thomas and Apo's thugs had given him. But mentally, the man was entirely broken. My investigators reported that he rarely left his room, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. He was a ghost, a hollow shell of a man who had lost his money, his status, and his mind. Meanwhile, Evelyn and her family proved a dark truth. People like them are like cockroaches. They are incredibly difficult to crush permanently. The internet is a vicious beast, but it has a notoriously short memory. As weeks turned into months, the social media mob that had terrorized them moved on to the next trending scandal. With the digital heat dying down, Evelyn used their remaining cash reserves to pivot. She founded a new, boutique consulting firm. It was tiny compared to the empire of Aegis Tech, but Evelyn was a survivor. To her credit, the new company actually began to find its footing. Even Thomas, seemingly humbled by his brush with the London mob, used a small portion of their funds to open a trendy, low-key bar in the arts district. They were rebuilding. They were surviving. I sat in my office at Vanguard Capital, watching the financial reports of Evelyn and Apo's new startup tick upward. My hand hovered over the phone. I possessed the power to crush this new venture before it even got off the ground. I could make one call and have Thomas's bar raided by the liquor board. I debated it for days. Should I strike them down again? Should I ensure they never saw a dime of success for the rest of their miserable lives? But as I looked at a framed photo on my desk, Claire laughing, holding Leo with Lily smiling brightly beside them, I hesitated. We had our peace. Lily was safe. Was I becoming the very monster I despised by hunting them in their irrelevance? I decided to wait. Then the universe made the decision for me. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen, pouring a cup of coffee while Claire packed Lily's lunch for school. The television was murmuring in the background, tuned to the local morning news. Suddenly, the screen cut to a breaking news alert. Helicopter footage showed a massive, raging inferno illuminating the pre-dawn sky. Tragedy in the affluent northern suburbs this morning. The anchor announced, his voice grave. A multi-million-dollar estate has been completely consumed by a 5-alarm fire. I froze, the coffee pot suspended in my hand. I recognized the wrought iron gates on the screen. I recognized the stone driveway. It was Evelyn's family estate. My immediate thought went to Julian. I reached into my pocket for my phone to call my security chief, wanting my shadow team to investigate immediately. But I didn't, and Apo's need to. The authorities were already putting the pieces together. By noon, the chief of police held a grim press conference that was broadcasted across the state. There was no mystery. There was no need for private detectives. The official police report laid out a horrifying, undisputed sequence of events. Sometime around 3 a.m., Julian Sterling had bypassed the estate and Apo's rudimentary security system. He was carrying several heavy cans of industrial accelerant. Driven completely mad by his absolute ruin and the violent humiliation he had suffered at their hands, he had executed a meticulously planned revenge. He had barricaded the heavy oak doors from the outside and poured the accelerant around the entire perimeter of the house before striking a match. The old, sprawling mansion, filled with rich wood and heavy drapery, went up like a powder keg. By the time the fire department arrived, the roof had already collapsed. Evelyn, Thomas, and her parents never made it out. The entire family perished in the flames, trapped in the very home they had used as a fortress of their arrogance. But Julian Haddon and Apo's tried to escape. When the police finally breached the front gates, they found his body sitting against a stone fountain on the front lawn, illuminated by the burning remains of the estate he had once desperately tried to inherit. He had watched the house burn, and then, taking a stolen handgun, he had ended his own life. I turned off the television in my office. The silence that followed was suffocating. I had spent months strategizing, maneuvering millions of dollars, and deploying brilliant legal tactics to defeat my former in-laws. I had wanted to ruin them financially and legally, but this was a bloodbath. They had pushed a desperate, empty man into a corner, stripped him of his dignity, and violently cast him aside. In the end, it was Nanapos, T Vanguard Capital, that destroyed Evelyn and her family. It was their own toxic cruelty. The monster they had invited into their home, the man Evelyn had replaced me with, had become their executioner. The war was over. There was nothing left but ashes. The funeral was a quiet, profoundly somber affair. There was no media, no high society elite, and no grand eulogies. It was just me, Claire, and Lily standing under the gray sky of the cemetery, watching 4 caskets being lowered into the earth. Despite everything they had done to us, I organized the service and paid for it in full. I didn't and oppose. Do it out of a lingering sense of love or obligation to Evelyn. I did it for my daughter. As we stood by the gravesites, I held Lily's hand. She was weeping quietly, not necessarily for the woman Evelyn had become, but for the mother she had lost long ago. Because Evelyn and her family had no other living relatives, all of their remaining assets, the life insurance policies, the few untouched investment accounts, and the deeds to the minor properties they had left, defaulted to Lily. Later that evening, as we sat in the quiet warmth of our living room, Lily looked at the legal documents detailing her inheritance. Her young face was a picture of deep conflict. She didn't oppose. Know whether to feel wealthy or entirely hollow. I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. I don't oppose. Want this money, Dad? She whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. Feels wrong. I know, sweetheart, I said softly, but you don't oppose. Have to look at it as their money anymore. You can look at it as a lesson. I turned her to face me, making sure she understood the gravity of my words. Your mother and her family chased money, status, and pride at the expense of everything else. They forgot how to be kind. They forgot how to be human. And in the end, it destroyed them. Lily looked into my eyes, listening intently. You can take this inheritance and use it to do the good they never did, I continued. Use it for your education. Use it to build something positive. But always remember this. No matter how rich you become, no matter how high you climb in this world, never lose your humanity. A person without a good heart is truly bankrupt. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and hugged me tightly. In that moment, I knew the cycle of toxicity was officially broken. Years passed, and the dark clouds that had once hovered over our lives completely dissipated, leaving behind nothing but clear, open skies. I returned my full focus to Vanguard Capital. With the distractions of the past finally buried, the firm expanded exponentially. We acquired new tech subsidiaries, launched massive global initiatives, and became an unstoppable force in the financial sector. But I didn't oppose. Do it alone. Claire was right there beside me, not just as a loving wife, but as a brilliant, fierce partner in the boardroom. We fought our corporate battles side by side, perfectly in sync. We were a true power couple, invincible because our empire was built on mutual respect, trust, and an unshakable love. Everything my first marriage had lacked. As our wealth grew, so did our children. Lily blossomed into a remarkable young woman. She inherited my sharp, analytical mind and Claire's warm, diplomatic grace. By the time she entered university, she already had the poised, commanding presence of a natural business leader. She used the assets she inherited from Evelyn to start a philanthropic foundation, providing tech scholarships to underprivileged students. She took the darkest chapter of her life and turned it into light. Leo, growing up in a home filled with laughter and stability, became a fiercely intelligent and spirited boy. He worshipped his older sister and loved nothing more than sitting in my home office, listening to me and Claire discuss market trends over Sunday morning coffee. The business acumen was already taking root in him. One summer evening, as we hosted a barbecue on the back terrace of our estate, I stepped back for a moment just to take it all in. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the manicured lawns. Claire was laughing, her head thrown back, as she flipped burgers on the grill. Leo was running through the grass with our golden retriever, and Lily was sitting at the patio table, smiling as she typed on her laptop. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. The journey had been harrowing. I had been dragged through sickness, betrayal, and a brutal war for my family and Appo's safety. It was an unforgettable, traumatic experience that tested the very limits of my soul. But looking at my beautiful wife and my happy, thriving children, I knew I wouldn't Appo's change a single step of the path that led me here. The storm had finally passed, and our world was bathed in light. We had won the only thing that truly mattered, our peace and each other.
I see their eyes, they watch me fall. They laugh and think I've lost it all. I shut the doors, locked up inside, believing I've nowhere left to hide. But I'm drowning in my own doubt. I built the cage and locked it out. Trapped in failure, I can't escape. Stuck in the past, bound by fate. I scream for help and no one hears. I'm drowning in my deepest fears. I built the cave and locked it out. Trapped in failure, I can't escape. Stuck in the past, bound by fate. I scream for help and no one hears. I'm drowning in my deepest fears. They've forgotten who I am, the one who rose and took a stand. Now I'm silent, broken, small, but I refuse to lose it all. I built these walls, now I'll break through. No one can control what I do. I built these walls, now I'll break through. No one can control what I